is now being recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time to join us today. I do certainly want to be respectful for everyone's time, given this important subject matter, but also leave time for questions as we conclude. Before I get into the meat of the presentation, I wanted to give our Executive Director, Scott Grayson, an opportunity to say some opening remarks and let you know, how important it is that we take time to be aware of our surroundings, especially in the cyber world that is constantly changing. So with that, I'll turn it over to Executive Director Grayson for some remarks.
Hi there, everybody. This is Scott. We don't have quite as many fire engines as they have in Washington. I'm out in our Kansas City office right now, and Marty's in our Washington office. There's always a lot of action happening around there. So appreciate you all being on this webinar. A few months ago, what was emerging is a number of our chapters were receiving email scams, and some of them, actually responded to what was being asked. And what is amazing is that people out there are becoming much more sophisticated with the kinds of scams they're employing either over websites or email. And it doesn't matter how smart you are. They have figured out psychological warfare to make it seem like it's real. And so I thought that it would be useful if we convened a short webinar about what you ought to look for, what's actually happening out there. And, as Marty mentioned, Marty lobbies in Washington on cyber threats. Derek Albertson is on the line as well. He's our IT expert on staff here. And just a few other opening remarks. I was up in Minnesota this last weekend where I had moved from about 2 years ago, and I saw my mother-in-law. And when I lived up there, I was always on hand to help her with all of her computer work. But I moved away, so she doesn't ask anymore. And what I learned was in January, she was scammed. She was in her email website, a window popped up and said, if you don't call this number immediately, your computer will crash and you will lose everything. And as smart as she is, she dialed the phone number. They asked her for passwords, and they entered her computer, stole everything, and then for their work, they asked her to pay them for it and write a check and hold it up to the webcam, where they then raided her bank account. And she's a very well-educated, smart woman, but trusting. And so, this can happen to anybody. And so the purpose of our webinar is for Marty and others to share what's happening out there, what you should look for. And one last word, if any of you on this line were at PWX last year, we heard Lisa Monaco, who used to work at Homeland, speak about practicing safe e-hygiene. And that's really what a lot of the thrust of our webinar will be about. So thank you, and I want to thank you once more for being on the call.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate the good words. And we'll go ahead and get started again. As Rhonda mentioned, we can hold questions till the end. We'll try and breeze through the slides here for those of you that are able to tune in. Again, it's really something to have to emphasize, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it really bears repeating. This is something that can happen to anybody. This is not something that should be something that should be swept under the rug. We need to talk about these things to make sure we're all aware of these kinds of traps that are out there. As the executive director so adequately articulately put it, this is one of those things that it's going to constantly evolve, and we need to sort of stay sharp. So let's keep that in mind as we go through the slides today. Okay, wanted to start off with some numbers, some eye-popping numbers as far as I can tell. Roughly half of American adults, about 110 million people, have had their personal information exposed by cyber criminals, and that's as of 2015. So the most recent numbers I have that are concrete. So that, needless to say, that number has gone up, and it will probably continue to go up. The Federal Trade Commission, which is sort of the watchdog that handles the consumer complaints, has listed identity theft as the top complaint for the 15th year in a row. So that's obviously something that you need to be keen of. And those of us that can remember back when identity theft meant you dropped your wallet and your ID fell out, somebody took it, and that's about all that could happen. Unfortunately, that's not the case anymore. Keeping in mind, too, that about half adults, a little over half adults, 51%, do their banking online. And of those, 32% use a mobile device like a cell phone to conduct. It's so easy to do now, you're sort of in that state where it's peace of mind where I can do it from my cell phone. Well, that's something else you need to raise a red flag for you to be keen about. And the good thing about that is about 62% of those people that do use mobile devices are aware that they need to be cyber secure and they practice sound e-cyber hygiene. Now, some steps. I want to walk through some steps you can take to sort of give yourself the best shot to make sure you're protecting yourself in these areas. You want to review and verify the domains and links that you see. Even if you are 100% positive that that link is legitimate, you're going to want to take the time to check for oddities and make sure the spelling is correct. As you can see, Google.com versus Google.com. I mean, a quick read, you don't notice, oh my gosh, there's an extra G where an O should be. Or Microsoft.com versus Microsoft.com. Reading them quickly, you're not paying attention to what's going on. So one of the old tricks is always still tried and true, to just take your time to read through the information you have and verify that it's legitimate. Another quick sort of handy tool is when you hover over a link, if you just hover over for a second or two, you'll be able to see where you'll be taken to make sure it's a legitimate link. So even though if it looks like a safesite.com, it may not be that case. It may be taking you somewhere else where you don't need to go. So I'm pausing a little bit for emphasis because I'm hoping you'll write that down. Think about that for a second. You want to make sure that you hover over your link to make sure that's exactly where you want to go, because that's a huge defense in protecting yourself against anything that can take place after that. Now, these are all things that you think about and say, oh, I'm doing this already. Well, are you? Just got to ask yourself again. Do you know who the sender is? So as you're asking yourself, do I know who the sender is? Now, we're all pretty guilty of this. I know yours truly has done it before. We glance quickly, we look at the name of the sender, oh, we think that's so-and-so from down the hall, or that's so-and-so that we know. Well, you want to take the extra time to carefully review the details listed that you got there. Make sure that you're looking at it. Is the name spelled correctly? Is that the way the individual's emails usually look when I get them? Is it the signature? For me, one of the big tippers is I always go by Marty. If somebody sees something from Martin, that's not from me. There are a couple people walking this planet, not my parents, aside, that call me Martin. So they sound simple, but always want to look for those things and sort of clues. Is that the way the person signs? The type of language they use. Is it a little more formal than usual? Is it a little more chummy than usual? Does it have the general feel of what you expect from this person? And last but not least in this part, does it match the address that you usually correspond with? Is it if you're usually getting something from this person that's a hotmail.com, is it coming from Google? It's a little different. These should all be red flags. You can never be too safe, so don't think, am I being silly about this? You want to make sure that you've got that exactly right. Then you can ask yourself the next question. Are you expecting this email? Is this something you're looking forward to? Now, we all know, and that sounds like a loaded question, we're not always expecting emails. We don't sit and wait and think we're expecting something at a certain time. But is the nature of the email coincide with something that you expected at the time? In many cases, scams are created by sending something that have nothing to do with you on a day-to-day basis. If you're getting a requisition order from somebody in a department that doesn't usually ask you for that, that should raise a red flag. If your CEO is asking you, he normally doesn't ask you, hey, I need you to give me $300 to purchase a baseball ticket. You know, these things, yeah, it's a stretch, but, you know, those are the ways that you can sort of say, this is not exactly what I was thinking. And one of the old safe but true tests, if you're not sure of the person's identity, you can do a couple of things. One, it may not seem always convenient, but pick up the phone, make a call to that person. Hey, did you send me this? Are you sure? And if all else fails, walk down the hallway if you have that luxury. Take the time to walk down the hallway, find out, just verify. That extra step can save some headaches down the road. Worst case scenario, say, yeah, I sent it to you, what's the big deal? You know, I doubt that anybody with legitimate email is going to be very upset that you verified to make sure that everything was on the up and up. So you want to make sure you do that. Again, this recurring thing of taking your time, being careful. One advantage that a scammer or somebody with a nefarious purpose has is time. All it takes is one time for them to get through. Meanwhile, you've got to bat 1,000 yourself to make sure nothing gets through. One of the things when scammers use that time is an urgent rush. You've got to get it now. They'll create a false sense of urgency to get you to move quickly without giving it thorough thought and say, oh, geez, I've got to do this right away. Please open immediately. Confidential, time sensitive. These, again, should raise a red flag if this is not something you normally see. And if it is something you normally see, you need to take another step and say, let's look at this. What makes it time sensitive? Take that extra time to scrutinize the emails and make sure. Your bosses, your coworkers, everybody, your subordinates will thank you down the line to make sure that you verified this is exactly what it's supposed to be. It's not something that's just, I didn't send that, and then you're trying to retrace your steps, say, how did this happen? Let's stop and look at how we can mitigate this on a regular basis. And, of course, mitigation is something that all of us use a lot, and this is one of those times where we really need to put that into practice to make sure we mitigate any future damage. Now, the question of wire transfers has come up before, too. And this happens on an ongoing basis, throughout the country, as we talked about mobile banking earlier. APAW staff will not ask you for a wire transfer as payment. If you do receive something for payment via wire transfer, delete that email expeditiously and do not respond. Do not respond. Do not open that link. Do not invite an issue that you do not want to invite into your life. In fact, with today's technology, wire transfers are very, very rarely used as a form of payment. And if you see a request for a wire transfer, again, that should raise a red flag and make you think, something's not right here. To take a step to investigate that. Now, as I start to wind down a little bit, I wanted to share with you some resources that I count on heavily and I think are a huge help on a day-to-day basis. First one is through the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, the Stop, Think, Connect Toolkit. I'm hearing a little feedback. I hope it's not me. I apologize if it is. One of the things with the Stop, Think, Connect Toolkit on that website is APWA is an active member. We've participated with them at least since I've been here in 2016 to facilitate information and share information and make sure that what tools are out there are able to be accessed by our members and staff as well to say, hey, are we being smart? Are we taking the steps we need to make sure that we're protecting ourselves from ransomware, from malware, from any of these nefarious things that are out there? Another site I converge with is the DHS cybersecurity homepage. You would think a big, huge government agency would have a ridiculously hard to navigate and cumbersome website. Well, the good thing is they've split it down into so many sections that the cybersecurity homepage is extremely helpful and can walk you through what you need. Small business, big business, local government, state government, tribal, territorial. It's extremely helpful. And I would invite each of you to try those as well as SonicWall Phishing IQ Test. This is what I would give you as homework when we finish to check and see how much you think you know versus what you do know. So if I had some serious drum roll music, I'd use that. But I would invite you all to take the opportunity to investigate that and see how you do. So with that, I know I've kind of run through some things, but again, we wanted to be short and to the point and offer these tips out there and know that this is not just a one-time deal and that you'll be able to refer to this information at any point as well as contact myself. If you have questions, we want to make sure that we're getting information to you and available. And also remind you again, I can't preach this enough as Executive Director Grayson said, you know, this is something that can happen to anybody, and we just all need to be sharp and mind our P's and Q's. So with that, I open up to any questions if you want to go ahead and type them in, and let me know what you think. Thank you very much. Okay. I've got one question in, and I'll make sure I get it right. From Judy in the Mid-Atlantic chapter. We train regularly on cybersecurity in my department. Is this PowerPoint available for use? And the short answer is it will be. Yes.
This is Scott Grayson. If any of you have ever experienced or had any strange emails and you want to share with the group what that was and how you responded either way, that might be helpful to others.
Yes, thank you, Scott. Wow, I feel like I've solved all the world's problems, or at least put a dent into them. No question.
Anything else? I mean, if not, we like having short webinars. Not every webinar needs to be an hour long, but we really wanted, to share with you what we're seeing out there. And on one hand, what is nice is that most of the world is very trusting, and so that's what the scammers rely on. We haven't spoken yet about ransomware or other items that our hope is not hitting you yet, but you've read about ransomware in the news as well, and that's a much more problematic area. For those of you who are officers or who are working with chapters, what you ought to know as well is that a lot of these people running these scams either over email or web are targeting nonprofit groups that have the word American in it. Hence, American Public Works, they kind of come after those groups. And so we're finding more and more of that. North Carolina chapter sends our thanks. Well, you're welcome. Hope it was helpful. Marty, anything else? Or others on the line?
Scott, I'm sorry. I forgot to mention on the last slide, I did put my, I guess maybe I was trying to slip and hide, but my contact information is up there, my email address. Please feel free to shoot me an email if something pops up, and I'll be glad to help you, and if not, at least point you in the right direction.
Before we hang up, I ought to add, as long as we're speaking about cyber threats and scam over web and email, Marty specializes in this area in Washington, and one of his areas of work is focused around critical infrastructure, which we've held briefings on up on Capitol Hill, and we've brought people who work in public works into Washington to speak about issues there. And the reason I raise it is it is interrelated in your work world as well. We speak about smart grid issues, water grid, not grid, but water, and the ability of cyber threats through all of those interconnected systems. So one great illustration, or awful one, was when somebody broke in a power company's network. The network, though, that was really powering the office work, so Word, PowerPoint, Excel, but they made their way through there, and then were actually able to hack into the smart grid. So there's all kinds of stuff happening out there.
Absolutely.
This is Brian Van Norman. I would just add to Judy's point and to Scott and Marty is if you have other tools and resources that you have found perhaps that would be helpful on this topic, please feel free to forward those to Rhonda Wilhite. We're glad to look at those and see if those are things that we could post if we have permission to do so on our Chapter resources or be able to send those out to you. So thank you again.
That's a great idea.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.